Hello everyone, Pastor Don Sullivan here. Thank you for checking out our past sermons and other resources. I hope that as you watch this sermon or use the resource we've made available, you'll be encouraged and blessed along with your belonging to your local church family. If you find these helpful, I hope you'll consider giving to Redemption Church right here on our website. Again, pray that you are blessed and strengthened in your relationship with your loving Heavenly Father through Jesus Christ, led by the Holy Spirit.
Well, let's go ahead and let's stand together, and we're going to read from God's Word. This is where God's going to be preaching out of this morning. We're back in the book of Mark. Mark 9, starting in verse 2, if you want to follow along with me. Let me just mention real quickly, if you are new with us, and if you haven't been here before, or maybe you haven't filled out a Connect card yet, if you would fill out that Connect card, just a way for us to follow up with you. And there's also, like I said, that there's opportunities on the Connect card and on the prayer wall for you to share your prayer requests. Please do that. That's a great opportunity for us to know how we can specifically be praying for you. But the other thing I want to mention is if you need a Bible, if you know someone that needs a Bible, please let us know. We want everybody that wants a Bible, that needs a Bible, to have a Bible. So please let us know, and we will get you a Bible. But this is Mark 9, starting in verse 2. Follow along with me. And after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John, and he led them up a high mountain by themselves, and he was transfigured before them. And his clothes became radiant, intensely white, as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, and they were talking with Jesus. And Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you and one for Moses and one for Elijah." For he did not know what to say, for they were terrified. And a cloud overshadowed them, and a voice came out of the cloud, "This is my beloved Son, listen to him." And suddenly, looking around, they no longer saw anyone with them, but Jesus only. And as they were coming down the mountain, he charged them to tell no one what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So they kept the matter to themselves, questioning what this rising from the dead might mean. And they asked him, "Why did the scribes say that first Elijah must come?" And he said to them, "Elijah does come first to restore all things, and how it is written of the Son of Man, that he should suffer many things and be treated with contempt. But I tell you that Elijah has come, and they did to him whatever they pleased, as it is written of him." This is the word of the Lord. Go ahead and have a seat.
January 10th, 2021 is just kind of getting rolling, but I'm going to guess that already some of us have needed a reminder. Maybe just a little reminder that God is good, a little reminder that he loves you, that God is sovereign and in control of everything. You're not asking for this giant neon sign flashing, but just a little gentle reminder. I would guess that there's a bunch of us in that place right now, either here or online. This week, I received one. It's so subtle and there's so much background information, it's kind of hard to communicate it, but I'm going to try, so bear with me. If you go back into COVID back in March of 2020, and of all the changes and everything, all the adjustments that we had to make weekly, at least weekly, in terms of both preaching schedule and everything, we just kind of changed everything and learned to live on the fly for a while, and we still are. But the way God worked it out is we actually finished part 1 of Mark at Advent, and that was not the schedule. But I didn't even catch that. I didn't catch it. So in the craziness of everything, kind of got my head down working, and it's time to lay out the next section. What's our preaching calendar look like? Which we haven't even done that because we're living week to week, which is totally fine. Just not how we normally do it. It's driving me. It's stretching my faith a little bit. And so we sat down this week, Josh and Quentin and I sat down with the whiteboard and the paper, and we started laying out what's it look like. And I was blown away because we'll pick up Mark 9 today, and we will, by God's grace, unless something changes, we will finish Mark on Easter Sunday with the resurrection. Now, I know that doesn't sound like much, but when you're in charge of laying out all those details, and God just kind of lines it out, I got so excited. I was actually thinking, it's kind of a longer story. I don't have a lot of time to do it. I was running and thinking about, I know I got a sermon planning meeting coming up. I was running at the gym, and I just had this moment of, hey, just lay out Mark and see what happens. I'm like, okay. So I come into the office, and I had some other stuff to do, but I didn't. I just went straight into it and started laying it out, and it just laid out week by week perfectly. So that we're doing the resurrection in Mark on Easter. And I was blown away. And in that moment, it felt like this little gentle sign, the sign of encouragement that yes, we've been dealing, even struggling week to week, but the Holy Spirit has been guiding us in the big picture of things that we had no idea he was even doing, that he is in control. And so that may not sound like much to you, but it really was a small reminder that, yep, we're on the right path. God is leading us. God is good, and the Holy Spirit's in charge, okay? Now, here's why I mentioned that story. Because today's story, you may not have thought this as Josh read it, but today's story is about a sign. Whatever the transfiguration of Jesus is, it is a sign, okay? And it was an absolute glowing neon sign. Mark tells us that Jesus actually glowed, that he had this such bright, radiant, intense white that it was unlike anything on earth. But before we talk about this sign, and before we talk about what God was telling his people, we need to ask this question: why did Jesus and Peter and James and John, why did they need this sign? What's going on in the background that God had to do this amazing thing? And you need to understand that there's nothing like this. The Transfiguration is completely unique. It's pretty complicated. There's a lot of things we don't understand about it, but it's completely unique to Jesus' story. There's really not kind of parallel or similar stories in other religions or even in mythology. This thing that God does is really, really unique. So let's back up for just a second and get there together. If you remember, the first part of Mark, chapter 1, verse 1 through roughly 8:30, somewhere in that range, that Mark writes this gospel, this giant, amazing story of who Jesus is. That's the question. Who is Jesus? What is his identity? So, Mark writes the Gospel of Mark to encourage these suffering, persecuted Christians living in Rome, living in the capital, living far too close to the evil and insane Emperor Nero. So remember, these Christians that received Mark's Gospel first were suffering and being persecuted and being attacked and even being killed because they were faithful and loyal to Jesus above all. The things that Nero did to Christians is beyond understanding, beyond evil. And so, to do this, to encourage these Christians in part 1, Mark reminds them of who Jesus is. The most important question anybody could ask. You have to ask the question and answer the question, who is Jesus? So for 8 chapters, we get story after story of Jesus coming in under the authority of God, the power of God, and pushing back darkness, delivering people from sin, death, disease, challenging religious power structures that were actually hurting people. He pushes back the kingdom of darkness. And Mark part 1, section 1, ends in about 8:29, where Peter declaring, this is key, that Peter declares that after everything we've seen you do, Jesus, you must be the Christ. You have to be the one that God promised for thousands of years. This is where things start to change. Right after Peter makes this amazing declaration of faith, which he didn't know what he was saying, so it wasn't a perfect confession. Right after that, put yourself in this situation. Jesus says, yes, but you don't know what you mean by that. Because I, the Son of Man, the Christ, the promised Messiah, I am going to suffer and die, and you're going to see it all. Put yourself in Peter's place. You've been following this Jesus around. You've seen him challenge and heal and do amazing things that only God can do. You just profess that he is the Christ, the Son of God. And Jesus turns around and says, yeah, and you're going to watch me die. There is not a Jew alive when Jesus was on the earth. There was not a Jew alive who did not expect the Messiah to come and destroy Rome and reestablish Israel's identity as a nation. Their vision, their picture of the Messiah was political and military, not spiritual. So when Jesus tells Peter and the other disciples, yeah, and you're going to watch me die, they had no category for that. But God knew that all of our problems, and this is important for us today, more than I even knew when I wrote this sermon, You need to understand that your biggest problem, my biggest problem, our biggest problem is not the craziness that's going on in our country. Their biggest problem was not the Roman emperor. We've got a deeper, bigger, harder, more evil problem, and that is our sin. And God knew that, and in His love, like we just sang about, He pours out His grace and mercy on their biggest problem, their problem of sin. And He delivers them not from the oppression of the Roman Empire, which, by the way, will fade and go away, but He delivers them from the sin and oppression of the kingdom of evil and darkness. So Mark shifts from talking about Jesus' identity, who is this, the Christ, the Son of God, to what is Jesus going to do? That's where the book of Mark pivots and changes. Okay? What must Jesus do? And that is His mission. So in 8:31, Peter proclaims, Jesus, you're the Christ. Jesus says, and tells the rest of the disciples what His mission is to suffer and die. You got to know that this is the first time, there's 3 times in Mark that Jesus says this. This is the first time, and all 3 times we'll see in the future, all 3 times the disciples miss it. They don't get it. And who would? Let's not be too hard on them. There was no category. Think about this for a second. There's no category for a Savior who dies. How can a dead Savior save you from anything? There's no category for a Messiah who publicly has suffered and humiliated. If you expect Jesus, your Messiah, to reign in power and glory, He cannot be humiliated. They have no category for what Jesus is telling them that He's actually going to do. So, yeah, they think they understand who He is, but they really, really don't. There's no category for what Jesus is telling them. And so when Jesus tells them, right before our story today, I will suffer and die, and you guys are going to see it. The disciples are thrown into this tailspin of confusion and bewilderment. And then right after that, our story happens. You got to remember in Mark, like we've said all along, every detail matters. The tiniest detail matters in Mark. And not only that, Mark carefully puts his stories in the order that matters. He's for maximum impact, to be the greatest possible encourager for the suffering Roman Christians. So we have to begin by acknowledging that it's no coincidence. Right after Jesus tells Peter and the disciples, you're going to see me suffer and die, right after that, the transfiguration happens. What is Mark trying to do? Actually, what is God trying to do? So Jesus takes Peter, James, and John, and only Peter, James, and John, and He hikes them up a mountain. It's a pretty significant mountain. Almost big enough that people in Wyoming would almost call it a mountain, right? It's a real mountain. He hikes them up, and as they get to the top of this mountain, you got to picture this. They're hiking up the path, and all of a sudden they get there, and Jesus becomes transfigured. That's the word Mark uses. So he uses this word transfigured to describe what it means. And what he means is this complete and radical change, radical transformation. Jesus' transformation was so complete and so powerful that Mark tells us even his clothes were different, right? Even his clothes were different. You got to remember, and in Wyoming, we get this. In this culture that Mark and Peter and James and John live in, white clothes were really rare. They just didn't have white clothes. You had to be royalty or very wealthy to have white clothes. And the answer is simple. It's the same reason you don't wear white clothes to mow your grass or change your oil. You didn't have a lot of clothes, and so you wanted clothes that wouldn't show dirt. So white clothes were pretty rare, right? So when Mark tells, or when Peter, so Peter is, remember, Peter is Mark's source. Mark gets his information from Peter himself. So as Peter describes to Mark what this moment was like when Jesus becomes transfigured and glowing so bright, it's almost like Peter runs out of words, because it kind of reads like Jesus' clothes were the whitest white you've ever seen. They were whiter than the whitest white. He just runs out of words. So picture this. You're there, Peter, James, and John. Jesus is transfigured. He's glowing is the only word. He's radiating light and glory, unlike anything we have ever seen. And then all of us, on top of that, Moses and Elijah show up. So you're Peter, James, and John. You're blown away by Jesus. You can't hardly look at him. And then you kind of fight through the glare. And then there's Moses and Elijah. Now, how they knew it was Moses and Elijah, we don't know. But it's very clear they knew that this was Moses and Elijah. Right? Now, what did Moses and Elijah actually mean? What's going on here? You got to remember who Moses was. Moses was and still is Jewish people's, Israel's greatest hero. Because he's the one who delivered them from Egyptian bondage. He's the one that spent time where? On a mountain for 6 days. Same like we have in this story. Spends time with God on a mountain, speaking directly to God, has a relationship with God, has access to God that nobody else, no other human, except for Jesus, no other human has ever enjoyed. Nobody got the relationship with God that Moses got. So he comes down. Exodus tells us that Moses climbed a tall mountain, spent 6 days receiving God's law. Okay? So Moses is the lawgiver, closer to God than any person had ever been. Elijah, considered maybe the greatest prophet to God's people. If you remember, Elijah defeated hundreds of false prophets and priests of evil that were trying to distract and destroy God's people. And Elijah also met with God on a high mountain. So there's so much Old Testament in this story that I don't have time to unpack it all. But in the Old Testament, God's presence was always on a mountain. You went to a mountain to meet God. Key figures went to a mountain to meet God. And in the Old Testament, God's presence was shown by a cloud. So the cloud of God's presence would fall on that mountain. It's exactly what we see here in this story. So together, Moses and Elijah, they're back on the high mountain. The cloud of God's presence falls on them. And so Moses and Elijah, probably two of, if not the two greatest deliverers of God's people. Moses represents the law that Jesus came to fulfill. And Elijah represents the prophets who had long foretold of the Messiah, Jesus. So Moses and Elijah being on this mountain is like God telling Peter, James, and John, who knew their Old Testament better than you and I ever will, by the way. He's telling Peter, James, and John, Jesus is the fulfillment of everything you've ever studied, of everything you know about what I'm going to do and how I'm going to deliver my people. Jesus is that fulfillment. He takes care of the law, and he keeps my promises that the prophets have told you for thousands of years. So you're standing there on the mountain. Your jaw is on the ground. Jesus is radiantly glowing and glorious. You see Jesus talking to Moses and Elijah. Mark tells us that. Peter tells Mark, yeah, we watched Jesus talk to Moses and Elijah. Just having a chat. Like, that's a conversation I'd want to be a part of. I'd want to just not to speak. I just would like to hear. Like, what would Jesus and Moses and Elijah talk about? Right? That's how my brain works. I'm just like, what would they say? Then I realized, man, I couldn't hang in that conversation. That conversation would go so far over my head. You know, it would be like nuclear physics. I would have no idea what they were talking about. But this idea fascinates me that Jesus and Moses and Elijah are talking, and that matters, and we'll come back to that. And then something even more amazing happens. Right? Mark says, at that moment, Peter, James, and John were terrified. You think? And we get this moment. You know how you've been around, maybe you're one of these people that when you get nervous and get scared, you kind of get quiet. You kind of slow down. You don't move. You don't speak. You just kind of get quiet. That seems to be James and John in this story. And then there's other people, maybe this is you, where when you get nervous, when you get scared, when you get anxious, you can't stop talking. You can't stop moving. There's nothing wrong with either one. That's just a personality. It's the way God made you, right? So that seems to be Peter, consistent throughout the New Testament, is Peter's the guy when things get a little bizarre, weird, strange, scary, he goes into overdrive. And so look at what he says. I think this is kind of funny. Peter has to say something and to break the awkward silence. Like, you got Jesus and Moses and Elijah talking, and Peter speaks up and he says, hey, Jesus, it's good we're here. Really? It's good we're here, Jesus. We're on your team, right? So here's what we're going to do, Jesus. It's so good that we're here. James and John and I, we're going to build you 3 tents You're each going to get your own tent, right? Now, you and me, that sounds random. Like your first response to an important person is probably not to build them a tent. You're not going to build them a blanket for it, right? So, Mark uses the word tabernacle. That's an important Old Testament word. In the Old Testament, God's people would travel led by what? If you remember, led by a cloud in the day, God's presence. And they would travel and they would follow this cloud in the day and they would follow fire by night. But they would follow this cloud in the day. And wherever the cloud stopped, they would stop. And they would immediately, the first thing they would do is they would build up the tabernacle, this massive, beautiful, but temporary tent of worship. And they would put the tabernacle smack dab in the middle of all 12 tribes of Israel. And they would then set up their own tents and tabernacles, but really tents, around this tabernacle. And the idea was that God's presence was just smack dab in the middle of God's people. He tabernacled. It's actually a verb. To tabernacle with someone means that you're there with them, you're among them. And so God would tabernacle with his people. So it kind of makes sense that, hey, Old Testament, we're on a mountain. We got Moses and Elijah. We've got the glory of Jesus radiating. This is a big deal, so we're going to raise tabernacles. We're going to make tents for you guys. Even though it doesn't make sense to us, it kind of makes sense to Peter. Like I said, he knows his Old Testament better than you and I will. So he's got to be thinking, God is here, so we must build places, tabernacles, for his great men to be among us. What else are we going to do? And as Peter the way Mark writes this, I think the way Peter describes it, the way Mark writes it down, as Peter barely gets the word out of his mouth, he gets interrupted by God. The voice of God speaks from out of the cloud. No sooner has Peter opened his mouth than God himself speaks. And I think God is talking to Peter primarily, certainly to James and John, but remember, it was Peter is the one who said this, that Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of God. That's Peter. It's Peter who says, hey, it's good we're here, Jesus. Let us build you some tents. And so I think God is really talking to Peter. And so if you're one of those people who, when you get afraid, when doubt comes in, when anxiety comes in, when fear comes in, you go into overdrive like it looks like Peter does. Listen to these words, because what God speaks out of the cloud and says, Peter, stop. Just stop. Stop trying to do whatever you're doing. Take this moment. You're seeing the glory. You're listening to the glory of Jesus. You're listening to my voice. Peter, stop. You'll never experience anything like this again. Peter, you called my son the Christ. You were right, but you didn't understand it. And so, again, you have God's words saying, this is my beloved son. Listen to him. Stop. Just stop talking. Stop feeling like you need to do something right now. Just stop and see Jesus for who he is. Peter, you and I, Gillette Christian, see Jesus the way God sees him. That's what the transfiguration is. In that moment, Peter, James, and John got to see Jesus the way God himself sees Jesus. So when we have those moments, we talked about Epiphany last week, this idea that God reveals himself. We have those moments. Don't rush through it. Just stop and see Jesus again. And then Mark tells us at that moment, Moses and Elijah, they disappear. See, God is saying, Moses and Elijah, they're great men. They're great men. And in their day, they spoke great words, the words that I gave them to my people. But they're gone. Moses and Elijah are gone. So Peter, James, John, you, me, listen to Jesus and no one else. Listen to the words that are going to come out of his mouth. Only Jesus can save you. Only Jesus can accomplish God's great salvation plan for you and for all people. Just think about that for a second. So now that's Peter, James, and John, apparently, and Jesus, they start heading back down the mountain. They start working their way back down the mountain. And scholars think that in verse 15, which we didn't read today, but when they get to the bottom of the mountain, we'll talk about this a little bit more next week, but when they get to the bottom of the mountain, the crowds were amazed. And scholars think that the reason they were amazed is because Jesus was still actually glowing. Now, we get that in Moses in the Old Testament. That happens to Moses as well. But Jesus, Peter, James, and John come down the mountain. Scholars think that Jesus was still glowing. The crowds are amazed. But you got to back up on the mountain. Like, you've been hiking with kids. You've had conversations with kids, grandkids. And so it's question after question after question. And Peter just got told, all of them got told, stop, just listen. Listen to Jesus. And there's things going through their mind. They can't contain themselves. Jesus tells them about the resurrection. And they're just trying to process, Mark says they're just trying to process what Jesus is talking about. But they have one question that they have to ask. They have to ask, like a little kid who's just got one more question. But why, Mommy? But why, Grandpa? He can't keep from asking. And they say, Jesus, what about Elijah? Where's Elijah in all this? See, the scribes, the religious leaders, the tradition was that before the Messiah came, Elijah would come back. He would stand on a high mountain. So 3 days before the Messiah would come back, Elijah would come back. And on day one, he would weep and mourn and lament. Deep sorrow, pour out deep sorrow for the desolation of the land and the way God's people have fallen away. And then he would end day one by saying, peace, and the prophet, or the tradition says that this voice would be heard throughout the whole world. Everyone on earth would hear Elijah say, peace has come to the world. And on the second day, the tradition said that Elijah would say that the whole world could hear, good has come to the world. And on day 3 before the Messiah came, Elijah would proclaim, at last, salvation has come to the world. And then the Messiah would arrive, and he would make all of those statements, peace, good, and salvation, true. He would bring that peace, good, and salvation into the world, into human reality. And so what they're asking was, if you're the Messiah, we're still trying to get our brains around what you said, and then what we just saw. We're trying to get our heads around this Jesus, our hearts around this Jesus. If you are who you say you were, except God just told us you were, so wait a minute, what about Elijah? Where was he? We missed him. And Jesus says, you're right. Elijah is coming first, but you missed him. He's already been here. He's already been here. Go back to the beginning of Mark. Mary's cousin Elizabeth has a boy named John the Baptist, whose job was to go before Jesus, his cousin, and proclaim, prepare the way, the salvation of God has come. It was John the Baptist. And Jesus says, they're going to do to Elijah, to John the Baptist, what they're going to do to me. And they did. They arrested and murdered John the Baptist. They did what they wanted with him, Jesus says. So John the Baptist fulfills that tradition, fulfills that prophecy. And they get to the bottom of the mountain, and that's where it stops, and we'll go into what happens after that next week. That's the story of Jesus' transfiguration, but you got to see this. From this point on, at the bottom of the mountain, Jesus has set his eyes south. He's in the northern part of the territory, and Jerusalem is to the south. And everything he does from this point on, he's working his way to Jerusalem. He's working his way to the crucifixion that is waiting for him. He's working his way to the humiliation, the betrayal, the torture, and the murder that he knows is waiting for him. But what is God trying to say? Jesus takes Peter, James, and John to the mountain, and they have this experience. What is God really trying to do? What is he trying to say about Jesus? What did Peter, James, and John need to hear? And what do you and I need to hear today from this story? So, for the disciples, God is teaching Peter, James, and John. Remember, he just told them he's going to suffer and die. God is teaching Peter, James, and John that his suffering and death does not disqualify him. Everything they're about to see happen to Jesus is a part of God's plan. And that doesn't mean that God's not in control. That doesn't mean that God's salvation plan has gone off the rails. God says, this is my son, listen to him. What words were they supposed to listen to? It was the words that Jesus said, you're going to see me suffer and die. God says, listen to him. You're missing it, boys. Pay attention. God needed to remind the disciples that Jesus, whatever they're going to see happen, that through it all, Jesus was still the Christ. Part 1, mark that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. Full authority to bring the kingdom of God into and defeat the kingdom of darkness. How does he do that? Part 2, by heading to Jerusalem. And then they needed to see that, understand that whatever happens, God's in control. Let me ask you this question. Why do companies roll out wheelbarrows of cash to celebrities to endorse their product? Because we listen, we pay attention. Right or wrong, we do. God bringing Jesus and Peter and James and John to the mountain is this phenomenal endorsement of who he is. When God himself says, this is my son, he's making it very clear to Peter and James and John, remember, everything you see, this is how you need to see Jesus. Now, God also, remember, Mark was written to persecuted, dying, suffering Christians in Rome. God needed Mark to remind those Christians that Jesus was still who they believed him to be. Got to put the order in place. By the time the Christians in Rome get the Gospel of Mark, clearly, obviously, Jesus has died and resurrected, so they know the story. By God's grace, they placed their faith and hope in Jesus alone. By God's grace, they came to a place of true faith, and Jesus as their true and eternal king. So yes, Mark needed to remind them that at that moment, Nero was king, was emperor, but Jesus was their true and good and eternal and righteous king. Now think about this. Think about all the movies or TV shows where a king, or even president, but where a king or queen is inaugurated. The ceremony that goes with all that. If you're a history, you like history kind of like I do, you've seen like movies represent that. The tradition, the ritual, the glory is crazy. None of that compares. So they were in Rome, and when Rome got a new emperor, I mean, they rolled out all the stuff. They pulled all the stops out. They went nuts for a new emperor, right? And Mark wants them to see that nothing compares, nothing you have seen on earth compares to the glory and the authority and the power of Jesus, because God himself inaugurated, God himself declares Jesus is my son and my Messiah. So the Christians in Rome needed to be reminded that God was anointing and inaugurating and proclaiming Jesus as king, even if the emperor was evil. So they would understand that as they read the story. Now, what about you and I? What about you and I? As you and I read this great story, God wants to remind you that if you're a true believer, if you're a true disciple of Jesus Christ, he is close to you no matter what. The Holy Spirit right now wants to remind you that your suffering does not mean that God has left you, that God's plan for you has gone off the rails. Your suffering, your hard days do not mean God's love and power and plan has been overwhelmed by everything that's going on around you. As a Christian, you have a hope and salvation in a future that cannot be shaken because of Jesus. You and I need to remember today that Jesus is always with you. Picture this. Go back up on the mountain. There was a moment where on that mountain, Jesus and Moses and Elijah and God were present. And Jesus chose to obey and come back down the mountain. He could have stayed. He could have gone back to glory. But he didn't. He chose to leave that again, just like he did when he was born. He chose to leave that again and come back down the mountain with Peter, James, and John. He chose to stay with them. Jesus is the greatest reminder that God's presence is with you. So maybe this morning you need to hear the same thing Peter, James, and John heard. You need to hear God remind you, stop, slow down, stop fearing, don't be afraid. This is Jesus. listen to him. In all your pain, confusion, doubt, look to Jesus. Hear God tell you again, this is my beloved Son. He has come to bring you peace and goodness and salvation. Listen to him. So this week I have kind of a strange final assignment for you guys. For all of us, really. This week, this is a story about radiant, glorious, transforming light. The light of Christ. So as you go out through the day, pay attention to bright lights. As you're driving through at night, pay attention to bright lights. Look at the sun. Carefully look at the sun. But look at things that are just a little too bright, okay? And when you do, remember the story of Jesus' transfiguration. Remember that Jesus tells you he is the light of your world. He is the light that you need to destroy the darkness around you. Look at the bright lights and look to the light and remember Jesus is your King and Savior. Remember that the glory and the power and the authority of Jesus outshines anything you have ever seen. But like Peter, James, and John, we can't stay in that moment. We have to come back down the mountain. We have to pray and ask the Holy Spirit to help us be the light that we know for the people that we live, work, and play with. The light of Jesus in their darkness. See, our job is not to stand on the mountain and just be blown away. Our job is to come back down from the mountain and love people and the light of Jesus shine through our words and actions. So that other people, the people we live, work, and play with, can see Jesus as God's Son and listen to him.